Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where we do not rest week after week. We slave away all week, building you this giant pyramid of a story for you to enjoy. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you a story. What elements did you guys have? I had economic system.
I have unique vehicle.
And I had Wildcard.
Wildcard. Anything fun for Wildcard, Seth? Any world building stuff for Wildcard, or should I jump?
A little bit. I think.
Okay. So Wildcard Wildcard is you either get to choose any of the other systems we have or choose your own. So which one did you choose or decide to make?
So it'll be kind of setting / history a little bit, I guess. Kind of the setup, at least, where I guess our present world came from.
Okay, let's hear it.
This is happening. Okay. So, and I think I mentioned this to you too when you were up here the other day. And so with Wildcard, I was like, hey, you know what? I should use this. This would be the perfect chance.
Perfect.
So the idea is, and I'd come across it a while back, and I thought that it would be kind of interesting. And as many people know, everybody learned in school that Christopher Columbus discovered America, and, that's, most factually not true.
Yeah.
True to a point of, to that modern society's discovering of what we kind of know of America, but kind of my setting here will take a little bit of a turn from that. So imagine years before, obviously the Vikings have stories of going down to across from Iceland to Greenland and then down into what they would call Vinland, which describing what they found would have described at least Maine, if not closer to Virginia at some point, but at least from different things I know that they found different archaeological stuff up in Newfoundland and, kind of the eastern Canada. And I don't know how far into the United States. I know there's the debate on whether the Kensington stone in Minnesota was an authentic thing or not. I won't get into that, but so that's also slightly irrelevant. But the path that I'm taking is around, what would have that been? Probably about the 8th to 9th century, when the Vikings would have started coming over here. They would have opened up. So now this is my twist on it here. So they would have opened up more of a intrigue to the quote unquote New World in much of Europe, and actually sparked the kind of the westward travel much earlier than Columbus or anything of that. Now, again, being this is not exactly historical, I'm going to just kind of dabble with the historical timelines a little bit here. But for, through most of the Middle Ages, for the next, let's just say they kind of started coming over here in 700-800, AD, kind of started discovering it, started making some offshoot kind of colonies. And so what you have is, instead of an America that was colonized by kind of industrial era, or just industrial, or post-Renaissance Europe, you actually have a Europe or a North America being colonized by the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, the kind of the medieval period of time. However, the twist of this, so if anyone's played Mountain Blade, familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of that idea where all these different civilizations in there, they have kind of their roots, and you kind of this kind of looks like France, or this is kind of the steppe people, like a Genghis Khan kind of people, or I know that's kind of generic, but it's, each different people's, new land have kind of pulled on their own identity now, because again, it's a long ways to go. At first you have different, people colonizing different areas, and then starting to build up civilizations. And I'm going to move the timeline where most of the people that lived here, there is evidence that then there were hundreds and thousands, if not 2 or 3 times the population of Europe living in North and South America prior to them coming over. I'm going to move the timeline ahead a little bit and say that whatever catastrophic event had killed off most of the population in North America, but perhaps not all of South America, depending when we want to come in. That could happen later. But, and so kind of you have, a lot of different things then colonized and structured. So you have, instead of, colonial stuff, you've got castles and fiefdoms and,
slavery still.
Kind of whatever.
But no firearms. But no firearms. Lots of
I'd say maybe that might come in later, but maybe not to the same effect, because what ends up happening is this goes on for quite a few years, and also what you have is coming from the other side, you have, instead of the Europeans making it all the way across the continent, you kind of have some of the Asian people coming from the other side, coming from that side. So you kind of have, new China and, new Japan and, second Korea and all those, the new Philippines and not to leave anybody out, but kind of like staking out their claim. However, I mean, this is kind of a world that, as we've seen too, like people found it and then they just didn't seem to go over there. And it's not to make it a pandemic thing, but to use what did happen, the Black Plague, because this was a musing I had from, some previous events where, if everyone was supposed to be shut in and not talk to anybody and not go out anywhere, I had mused the idea that it would have been very easy to lose contact, that, let's say an entire continent might have existed if something like that happened and everyone just kind of holed up and got, scared to go out, scared to, travel across or bring, or
focused immediately on their immediate survival.
Right. And then so you give that a couple hundred years and, honestly, you would have forgotten that, there was this new land and people would have started to colonize it. And so that's kind of what's happened. So somewhere, whatever it was, like 1290 something, 1300s, you have the Black Plague move through. And kind of in essence, what comes of that is it kind of cuts off the communications and connection between the two worlds again. And so you have, ultimately this, basically America that was, let's say, developed into the feudal, not that it has to stay in the feudal system. I think in general, they would have, much in our own timeline, eventually, rebelled and started their own things. And I mean, people going that far would probably bring with them their high ideals that are kind of pushed out by the other societies. So I'd, like to think that eventually, different parts have kind of strayed into some other, let's say American nest.
Yeah, kind of that's systems. A fun hope.
It's a fun hope. But yeah, no, that's kind of the setting. There could be a lot more to it as far as like who would go where and stuff. I mean, you can look up and find different videos on that, and it's all very interesting if you want to do that. But that's kind of the backdrop or the setting that we have.
So this people group that kind of settled things, and then there was they lost touch. And by the time Enlightenment age or Renaissance age exploration and stuff, they found quite a different continent, quite a different new world than in our history. Is that what you're saying? That once contact was reestablished, instead of having a bunch of a native population to subjugate, they had an organized society, multi-ethnic organized society?
Or maybe not necessarily that after they repopulated, it's just this is the system. So whether the story that we build is based in before when communication was key, or based in right after the Black Plague kind of stopped things, or based in the re-establishment of communication, this is the place that we live in. I like that. I remember you talking about that, and I'm glad you decided to choose that because that's a cool one.
Yeah.
All I can think of is the Great Wall of
I think what you have
the Great Wall 2
in North America, you have. I mean, to give a little bit more context to it, of course, different places. In the one of the videos I watched on this, it kind of had, and you could basically just say the Mason-Dixon line. So like as far as the North and the South was like oh shoot, I need air conditioning to survive.
Yeah.
So there would be a lot of population kind of north of that line, but not south of it. And then of course you have a lot of places that are swamps and, or deserts and things like that where, there's been desert people, but again, you have, I think what has happened is, a lot of the roaming native tribes kind of mixed, because this is another interesting thing I wanted to throw in too. But then you have like in kind of what would be the plain regions would have kind of mixed a culture of like a half Indian, half kind of frontier cowboy, where like nothing was ever kind of set in place because there was, you kind of had to jump from one water hole to the next, herding buffalo or cattle or whatever it is. And, raiding the Mississippi River Valley, at least the western side of it, and then up to the Rockies, kind of these marauding, not like marauding like they're all evil, but just that was kind of what was set in, was kind of a half, maybe like a half cowboy, half, Indian, plains kind of thing, where they, herd and drive the buffalo and, bring them to certain markets and then, kind of roam about. But then, I don't know, just all the different things where, different types of civilization would sit in, where you would have, I don't know, not so many people in the areas we might have people now, because, swamps or air conditioning, or much less. It would look much different than kind of our modern convenience of being able to just simply, drain a swamp or stay inside a completely airtight facility away from mosquitoes and stuff. But also in that sense, you take Minnesota, for instance, it gets a lot of flack for having a lot of mosquitoes. Same thing with Wisconsin or Michigan. I'm pretty sure they're the same thing. So not to single Minnesota out, but I know a lot of that came, was it Teddy Roosevelt came up at one point and saw all the pines and had commented on it, and then years later had come in and they had cut them all down because of the logging. And that's not a plug for we shouldn't cut trees down. I'm just saying, like, back then they just kind of was like, wow, these are a lot of nice trees, we'll take them, and they didn't do anything else. And so that's when a lot of the swamp would have taken place, because of all the water that was being sucked up by these old forests that just weren't replaced. And so that's where you get a lot of at least the swamps up here.
Yep.
Swamps and bogs.
That's the unfortunate truth. Cool. Well, let's figure out how that'll work with our other things. Reed, do you want to go next, or should I go next?
I want you to go next.
Okay, so economic system. We were basically, humans struggled on with some forms of currency, but mostly a barter and trade system for a long time. We traded valuables, food for iron, wheat, rice, sand, grain, cows, weapons, whatever it was. It was all a lot of bartering going on. And it wasn't until some very early work happened in Egypt that people discovered glass. And this isn't glass like your standard glass. This is an alchemical process to convert an element into a lightweight, today we'd call it plastic, transparent shard known as glass. This glass has several properties. One being that it can be melted down and diluted into its base property. So if you have, let's say, iron glass, it'll be a dark gray glass, very translucent, so you can kind of see behind it, but can't really. But it also is incredibly light, and it's a weird combination of materials and systems. Part of it has to do with the sands around Egypt being kind of baked in some form of what we would now call radiation from the aliens taking off. So yeah, there's aliens, just so everyone's clear. And this, you would basically combine it like in a 2-to-1 sort of system with another element and then melt them together. And then your resulting shard would be stronger than your original thing, lighter than your original thing, than your original element, semi-translucent. The purer the original base element was, the clearer the glass was. So the cathedrals decked out in stained glass windows represented a wealth beyond imagination. Because they were incredibly pure and incredibly vast. It became a way for the church to hide its wealth, and then if they ever needed to go to war or something, then an unruly mob would burn down a cathedral, but not destroy any of the stained glass windows, allowing them to take down the stained glass windows, recycle them into their elements, and distribute them as money. This was a kind of a highbrow thing that not a lot of people knew about for a while, but as the first glass foundry made its way to the New World, in what would be now known as Plymouth, this entrepreneur, he had connections, in different systems, and he had shipments of ships bringing him, loads of this specific sand from Egypt. It was through the fact that this world began to be disconnected, like the Americas, not called the Americas now, but we'll just call them that now, began to be disconnected, that the creation and the secrets of glass became known to the common man. What's up?
I mean, we could just call it Vinland. That's kind of what
Vinland,
the
that's fine.
would have called it when they found it.
Yeah. So when any new connection is made, right, the glass is the regular traded the economy. It's what we use as currency. So you might use a very small shard of glass stained copper, and the tellers and the bankers, they have special lights that they can put it under to reveal its specific components. It takes a lot of work to make it. That's the reason why people can't just make a bunch of it themselves, is that you have to get the element, so let's say copper, and refine it and refine it and refine it to get the purest form you can. And then you need all of this special sand. And my thought is that about like 10 years after communication was severed, that this glassmith, he basically was running out of sand, and therefore this could be part of the story, sent someone, maybe he heard rumors of this same kind of sand being other places, and so he sent them to the equivalent of where the Grand Canyon is, or to down south to where the Mayans were, or across the entire country, the entire continent, to where they're just starting to get, legends of traders and people from the Orient. And it's like, if I can get a connection there, then I can get this. And I've only got like 2 years left of this glass and of this sand, and then I'm basically out of business. So that's the economic system. This thing is sold and traded. It's a one-to-one representative currency. Basically, if you hold it in your hands, you can bring it to any bank and they will tell you the purity level, and they have systems for the purity level. And so far, there's scammers who will just make what is now, what is considered stained glass. There's subsets, because there's only one smith, there's only one forge that can make this glass in the country, in the continent. So there's constantly people trying to cut it out, but it's incredible. The thing is that it's just too stable. If you find a bunch of gold, then you go and get a bunch of glass, then your 200 pounds of gold that you have now becomes 10 pounds of these, light yellow shards that are easy to hide and transport and use,
Okay. Well, I've adapted the unique vehicle for this thing. I've named it. I didn't have a name for it before. I just had a name for the principle on which it worked. It's called the Sand Speeder, and this thing is a huge hulking craft. It's enormous, and it was built by a guy that he discovered what he calls the polar wave. And it's a wave. It's an elemental. It's like electricity moves in certain ways. The forces of magnetic forces work in certain ways. Gravity works in certain ways. Well, he discovered through working with glass manufacturer, he discovered a principle, and he was able to create basically kind of like a rack that he could move stuff around his shop with that didn't need wheels. It kind of, think of like a hovercraft, like floating on a cushion of air, except what it is that he's learned how to manipulate this polar wave so that it has to do with innate polarity of matter. And physicists are like freaked out by it because it's changing everybody's opinion about what gravity is and everything else. But the thing that's he made this huge, like kind of a hulking ship-like cargo container, because the greater the mass, the greater the force, and the easier it is to like lift off. And you can literally use this, his sand speeder. It's like you don't need roads. I mean, you can leap tall buildings with a single bound. Right. And so that's it's the polar wave sand speeder. And the purpose of it is, shipping, finding the right sand, going and getting it, and shipping it back to where it can be worked through this process. So
it's like the guy who owns it is hired by this glassmith, in order to like find more of this specific sand.
And he just sets the thing in motion, and it takes you can literally just cruise across the ocean. You can just go wherever the best sand is. You can just do it, and it's fast. You can this guy's let's just say this guy's rich beyond imagining. So
yeah, there's lots of people also who hate him.
Yeah, there's
great.
that.
Well, great. So we're sitting at like 30 minutes now. Do we want to say that this is a good basis, or do we want to throw some ideas out there about how the story could go? Since we have no characters, we've created two characters, the guy who owns the sand speeder and the guy who owns the glass forge.
Yeah.
Do we want to try and create some conjecture about what it is they might do, or do we want to say this is good for now, we'll come back to this?
Maybe add some characters.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think, Seth?
I think we should add some characters for next time. Or if we're already at about half an hour, then we should call this a good base and maybe come back with some characters, see what we come up with for characters for next time.
Yeah, perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for episode 1 of this small mini-series. If you have liked these, how we do these little part 1, part 2, part 3s, let me know. I'd like to hear that. My email address is waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. That is my personal email address. That's the one I check every single day before going to sleep. If you want to message me on Twitter, it's @getsbettercast. If you want us to do more one-offs where we don't build on the story, I would say just wait. It gets better.